On this episode of Home Theater Geeks, we begin a journey to optimizing your picture quality. So stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek. Today I'm going to be talking about optimizing your picture quality, which is a fairly large subject, and so we're going to do it in steps because it's worth doing right. Now, TVs rarely come out of the box looking their best. They're usually kind of garish and over the top. Really, they're meant to look good in a TV showroom with a bunch of other TVs, with bright lights overhead. Now, unless you live in a TV showroom, that's not the environment they're going to be shown in. So it's important to me, as a home theater geek, to do a few things to make sure the TV looks its best in a home environment. Now, it's not, the way it comes out of the box is not how the creators intended it to look either. They watched and created the content in a mastering lab with a calibrated TV and very carefully designed paint on the walls and so on. Now, most living rooms aren't that either, but we can get a lot closer than the way it is when it comes straight out of the box. And I really strongly recommend that viewers watch content as the creators intended. You may disagree, and that's fine. You know, if you really prefer a cartoonish, artificial look, go for it. More power to you. But before you make that decision, I encourage you to give my way a try. See what you think. And fortunately, it's not difficult to tweak a TV to be much closer to what the content creators intended. It does take a few steps, which is why we're going to do it over a couple of episodes. But the good news is that the way the TVs are set up when the content is created is very clearly defined. And we can replicate that on the TVs at home. Now, one thing that makes this a little difficult is manufacturers come up with their own names for things. And so if I tell you to adjust a control called this, another manufacturer will call it something else. So I'm going to use the most common names for things. And eventually, I'm working on putting together a chart which identifies exactly what each manufacturer calls all of these controls. And I'll put it up when it's done. But for now, I'm just going to use the common generic names for some of these controls that you're going to look for in your TV's menu system. It's also important to remember that you can't break the TV by doing anything I suggest. Some people are kind of skittish and nervous about, oh, if I adjust this and it doesn't go right, I'll break something. You won't. It's not possible. So don't even worry about it. If you get really far afield and the picture looks, totally green or totally weird in some way, there's always a reset button somewhere in the menu system that you can just click on it and it resets the entire TV back to its factory defaults. So have no fear. Enjoy the process of experimenting with the TV controls and seeing what they do. And maybe you'll find something that you really like. And hopefully you'll find something that is more accurate to what the content creators intended. And that's really my goal here in talking about this. And I'm only going to go over a few controls in this show. And in a subsequent show later on, I'll do a few others. The ones I'm going to talk about today do not require a test pattern. You can just go in and find them and set them. Next time, when we talk about this again, there will be the need for a test pattern, which comes from a disc, which means you need a disc player, which I'll talk about here at the end. So first off, open up your TV's menu system. There was undoubtedly a button on the remote labeled menu. So you hit that, you see the main menu, and there'll be a picture menu and a sound menu and a bunch of other menus. And you want the picture menu. It's almost all TVs, at least to go this far, call it the picture menu. And it has all the picture controls. Clearly, that makes total sense, right? So you want to find one of the picture controls, probably at the top of the list in the picture menu, called picture mode. And surprisingly, most TVs, most manufacturers call this the picture mode. So that's great. And it will probably be set right out of the box. Might be set to standard. It might be set to dynamic or vivid. You absolutely do not want those picture modes. Those are the picture modes that give you neon grass and overblown colors that make it look kind of cartoonish. You do not want those. Instead, you want to look for the mode called cinema or movie. Or in some newer TVs, there's now actually a mode called Filmmaker mode, which was developed in conjunction with the studios and the UHD Alliance, a consortium of representatives from the TV industry, the video industry, that came up with a set of parameters that are under the umbrella of Filmmaker mode. And Filmmaker mode really does set up the TV to be what the content creators intended. So if you find one, pick it, select it. That's the one to use. If you don't, then there'll probably be one called cinema or movie. Now, this will make the image look less bright. Now, one of the characteristics of the default modes is that they're very bright. And that's because they attract your eyeballs, which is great in a TV showroom, but it's not so great in your living room. So the cinema mode or the movie mode or the filmmaker mode are going to be less bright. Now, that may be disappointing at first, but again, sit with it for a while. Your eyes will get less tired. You'll get less eye fatigue, which is a real problem. And it'll be more comfortable to look at. Another characteristic is in these default modes is that they put a bit of a bluish cast onto the image. And when you select filmmaker mode or cinema or movie mode, the image will perhaps look slightly reddish. And again, that may be disappointing at first. But start looking at things like green grass, blue sky, skin tones. They will look more natural. They'll look more like you're looking out a window. And again, if you sit with it for a while, you get used to it, it's much more comfortable, much more accurate to look at. And I really strongly recommend that you give it a try. Now, cinema, movie, and filmmaker mode are best in a darkened room. For one thing, they're less bright. So if you're in a really bright room, then they might not be bright enough. Maybe. I tend to find even in a bright room, they're plenty bright enough for me. But if you want more brightness, look in the picture mode selections. There might be something called ISF Expert Bright Room and ISF Expert Dark Room. And if you really want it to be brighter, I would try the ISF Expert Bright Room selection and see how that looks. It will be a bit bluer than the dark room settings, the cinema or movie or filmmaker mode or ISF Expert Dark Room. But it'll be brighter and might be more appropriate if you're watching TV in a really bright room. For the most part, though, the modes I have specified, cinema, movie, filmmaker, they're going to be fine for most things. Now, selecting one of these modes, cinema, movie, filmmaker, is also going to disable many of the so-called enhancement controls. There are things like black level expansion, dynamic contrast, Many TVs have a sensor in them that detect the amount of light in the room and adjust the picture accordingly. These controls, these settings, generally degrade the quality of the picture. They're called enhancements, but they're anything but. And picking one of the three modes that I've specified, generally speaking, will disable them, which is a good thing. You want them to be disabled. In particular, I want to talk a minute about one of these enhancement modes, which is generically called frame interpolation. And what that is, when a video signal comes into a TV, it will consist generally of 24 frames per second, maybe 30 frames per second for TV images, but for the most part, let's say we're watching movies and it's 24 frames per second. If you only display 24 frames per second, anything that's in motion will look very blurry. And so what TVs have done is they have created something called frame interpolation. And part of what the video processor in the TV does is it takes a look at one frame and then the next frame, and it says, what would it look like if there was a frame in between them, or more than one frame in between them? And it interpolates or synthesizes where moving objects would be between the actual frames. Well, this does make objects in motion sharper. It does. It works. But it also gives them a side effect that many people call the soap opera effect. It's the dreaded soap opera effect. And most sophisticated viewers really don't like the soap opera effect. They often call it hyper-real. And it's called that because it makes movies look like they were filmed as a soap opera. Soap operas are filmed for video. And video is at 30 frames per second, or 60, in more modern cases. So it makes it look like it was shot for TV. But movies were not shot for TV. They were shot for movies. They were shot for the commercial cinema, and they have a certain look, and most people like that look, and they want to keep that look. But when a TV comes out of the box, frame interpolation is most often on. It's enabled. And so selecting Filmmaker or Cinema or Movie mode disables it. But I generally recommend that you go check anyway. And the real problem here is, here's an example of where different manufacturers call frame interpolation by very different names, somewhat different anyway. For example, Samsung calls it Auto Motion Plus. Sony calls it Motion Flow, while LG calls it True Motion. So you kind of have to dig into the menu and figure out which of these controls is actually frame interpolation. Whatever it's called, you want to find it in the menu and make sure it's off. In some cases, there are even multiple controls within frame interpolation that let you adjust the strength of the effect. And you can play around with those and see if you like it. You might. But most people that I know really hate it. So I just turn it off. And again, as I said, selecting one of these picture modes probably disables it. Certainly Filmmaker mode does. I know this for a fact. If you select Filmmaker mode, frame interpolation is turned off. Tom Cruise would be very happy with you. He has famously talked about how much he objects to frame interpolation. So those are the basics for how to start optimizing your picture quality so that it looks like what the content creators intended for it to look like. Next time I visit this subject, I will be talking about some of the basic picture controls, like brightness and contrast and sharpness. Those are the three, really, that we'll talk about next time. And to set those correctly, you really need a test disc or a setup disc, which means you need a disc player. Now, a lot of people don't have players anymore. Some people anyway, because we're moving more and more towards streaming, and physical media, not so much. But as home theater geeks, we probably have a disc player. I know I do. It is the best possible picture quality you can get. No streaming or satellite or cable or any other delivery medium comes close. So it's worth having, in my opinion. And they're not expensive. So, and they let you set these controls by playing setup discs, which I will talk about next time. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Home Theater Geeks. If you'd like more, you need to be a member of Club TWiT, which costs only $7 a month, and that gives you full access to everything the club has to offer, including all podcasts ad-free and access to the club Discord. Or you can subscribe to Home Theater Geeks by itself for $2.99 a month. You can also get the ad-free audio version for $2.99 a month on Apple Podcasts. New episodes drop every Thursday via Club TWiT and Apple Podcasts. With full club membership, you can even watch us record the show live. Just keep an eye on the events tab in the club Discord for the schedule. I hope you'll join me for a weekly dose of home theater geekitude. Until then, geek out.